My full name is John Arthur Arguelles, and my date of birth is August 22nd, 1927, and my place of birth was Los Angeles, California. My father was Arturo Leopoldo Arguelles. He was born in Toluca, Mexico. My mother's name was Eva Adeline Powers, P-O-W-E-R-S. She was born in Mangum, Oklahoma. My father was from a Catholic family. My mother was from a Methodist family. My parents were married in 1926. I was born in 27. My younger sister was born in 29, and the stock market crashed. And soon after that, the nation was plunged into a depression. My father was able to hang on to his job with Standard Oil until about 1932. And then at about that time, living in Santa Barbara, as we were, close to the oil reserves offshore, my dad was finally lost his job. And my father, well educated in business matters, became part of a work crews. He'd go out in the morning and stand on a corner with a lot of other people and try to bring home a few dollars at the depths of the Depression. I started in high school in the early 1940s after graduating from Kern Avenue Junior High School here in East LA, and I graduated from Garfield in 1945. So I went through all of the war years when the United States was so involved in World War II at both Kern Avenue Junior High and then at Garfield High School. In January of 1945, before my June 45 graduation, I enlisted in the Navy. At that time, enlistees were given the option of signing up for a minority cruise, which meant you would be in the Navy until you were 21, or you could sign up for, quote, the duration of the hostilities, end of quotes. The Navy waited until you graduated from high school, and in my case, it was June of 1945, but before they take you on active duty. I remember graduating on a Thursday night in ceremonies at Garfield, and then on a Saturday morning, I was in front of the Federal Building in downtown LA, getting on a big bus, being transported down to the Naval Training Center in San Diego to start my boot camp training. But I can't claim any particular distinction in the military. No medals, no great military rank or anything of that nature, because I was about 8 weeks through my 10-week boot camp training in the summer of 1945 when they dropped the 2 atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and the war ended with dramatic suddenness. At any rate, I graduated from boot camp, so to speak, and being a reservist, having signed up for the duration of the hostilities, I don't think the American government was interested in sending any of the reservists on to further schooling. They knew that in time we would be discharged, so I got immediate shipboard duty. I was assigned immediately to the USS White Plains, named after White Plains, New York. It was what we called a CVE, which meant it was a small aircraft carrier, an escort carrier, not like the big CVs, but a smaller escort carrier. Well, I was discharged in July of 1946. This was just a month before my 19th birthday. I had been in the Navy just a total of 13 months total, with no distinction. I was an apprentice seaman. When I joined the Navy, I think I was discharged as a fireman second class. That was the classification I had. And I returned to Los Angeles, but the one big benefit that I received from my service, for which I'll be eternally grateful, was that I had earned the GI Bill to help me. And the GI Bill in those days provided you with formal education 1 year plus any time you had spent in the service. So I had 12 months plus an additional 13 months, or a total of 23 months of educational benefits should I elect to go to college. But without the GI Bill and the state bill, I'm not sure I'd be sitting here today conducting this interview. It was just a blessing for which I'll always be grateful. I had started UCLA as a pre-optometry major, but I didn't enjoy my chemistry, physics, and mathematics courses as much as I seemed to enjoy my business and political science and economic courses. And I switched majors in my junior year, and I graduated from UCLA as an econ major. But at any rate, when I graduated as an econ major, I went to work down on Spring Street, just as my father had done many, many years before, working for Standard Oil. I went to work for a securities firm, and I saved up some money. My long-range plans were to go back to law school and in time go into law practice and be a full-time practicing lawyer. I returned to the UCLA Law School, put in 3 more years, and got my degree in '54, passed the bar that summer, and started law practice in East Los Angeles. And I started out taking on criminal defense work. I did a little personal injury work, wrote wills. I was fortunate enough to wind up representing 2 professional associations doing all of their legislative work in Sacramento. And one was the Pacific Coast Quarter Horse Racing Association, which meant I went to Sacramento and made a lot of appearances before the Horse Racing Board. And the other was the California Association of Podiatrists, foot specialists. And I made a lot of appearances before the California Medical Board. And it was during that time that I met and became very close to the president of the State Medical Board, a very fine surgeon from Los Angeles by the name of Jose de los Reyes. And Dr. de los Reyes was my best man when I married Martha, my wife. That was back in 1958. And she was a beautiful young Mexican girl, and very popular in the courts. She worked in the domestic relations section of the LA Superior Court, with Elmer Doyle, who handled all of the orders to show cause in the family law department, and all of the attorneys knew and loved Martha, and I was the lucky one that snapped her away, and we were married in Palm Springs in May of 1958 with Dr. de los Reyes and his wife as our attendants. And as young marrieds, we bought our first home, GI home in Montebello, and Martha stopped working, and we started raising our own family, and she became active in Montebello affairs, as I did, as my practice began to grow, and it's a good life. In 1962, I decided I would run for the Montebello City Council. And I did run. I think there were 7 or 8 candidates for the 2 positions. I was one of the 2 that were elected to the 2 openings, and I really enjoyed my short tenure on the Montebello City Council because Montebello was in the process of developing its civic center at that time. And in addition to breaking ground for the construction of the Montebello City Hall on Beverly Boulevard and seeing it completed from the time that we put those shovels in the ground until the time we actually sat in the council chambers. I also saw the completion of the police building to the rear of the City Hall, and then I was a principal in negotiating with the County of Los Angeles for the location of a regional library as part of our civic center. Fortunately or unfortunately, depending upon your point of view, my 4-year tenure on the Montebello City Council was aborted. Just about the time I was ready to go in as mayor of my city. I would have loved to have served as mayor of Montebello, but that was not to be. Pat Brown, Governor Pat Brown of California, appointed me to the East Los Angeles Municipal Court, and that was the beginning of what turned out to be a 26-year judicial career, and I had to leave the Montebello City Council about 1.5 years into my 4-year term to start sitting as a municipal court judge. We were going through a hot spell, even though it was the fall of 1963. And I was in a very ugly family law dispute in trial in Southgate. And it was a hot afternoon. The air conditioning wasn't working too well. Everybody was tired. And there'd been a lot of rancor involved. And I noticed that the phone rang in the judge's trial department, and the clerk whispered something to the judge, and the judge says, "Gentlemen, we'll take a recess." And I was glad, because this gave me a chance to go out into the hall and talk with my client and get a little break. But then the judge said, "Mr. Arguelles, this call's for you. It's from the governor's office. You may take the call in my chambers," which is very nice of him. I went into his chambers and picked up the phone, and the female voice on the other end of the line said, "Mr. Arguelles, just one moment for the governor, please." And then Pat Brown was on the phone. And he said very nice things about my application, what he had heard about me, and so on. And I always have such admiration for Pat Brown because, governors are very, very busy. California is a busy state, and there are so many demands on their time. And here, this governor is taking the time with me, a minor official in the California judicial system, to give me a little pep talk about being on the bench. And he said, I'm a lawyer by profession. He said, I've been a lawyer in California for many years. I was Attorney General of California. I'm now governor. And he said, I think that one of my most important functions as governor is to put capable people on the bench. It's the third branch of government. It's terribly important to me. And he said in some states around the country, the judiciary is demeaned, it's been tainted with corruption and things of that nature. But we've always had such a clean judiciary here in California, and I hope you'll promise me that you'll do everything you can when you're on the bench to maintain that reputation. And of course, I indicated I certainly would. But a couple of 3 days later, when I received my commission in the mail with the customary wording appointing me to the municipal court, at the bottom of that commission, Pat Brown had written the words, "Work hard, be prompt, be humble, be kind." Signed, Pat. Now, doesn't that say something about Governor Brown? Anyhow, I was appointed to the municipal court by Governor Brown in late 1963. We had everything. You handle on the criminal side, you handle all of the misdemeanors, all of the felony preliminary hearings. In those days, we handled all of the traffic. And in 1963, if you got a traffic ticket, you'd ask for a jury trial. I was elevated to the Superior Court 6 years after I had gone on the municipal court. That would have been in 1969. And I was elevated by Governor Ronald Reagan. Now, kind of interesting, I was a Democrat by political affiliation, registration. And I was sitting in my chambers at the East LA Municipal Court 6 years after my appointment when the phone rang, and it was Governor Reagan's appointment secretary, and Ned Hutchinson was his name, telling me that Governor Reagan had just elevated me to the Superior Court, congratulating me. It was very kind of the governor, and I was very grateful, but you must remember that Ronald Reagan was never a lawyer, and I don't know that he attached the significance to his judicial appointments that Pat Brown did 6 years earlier. But I didn't get a call directly from Governor Reagan. I was notified by Ned Hutchinson, and the minute I finished my conversation with Ned Hutchinson, George Deukmejian was on the phone congratulating me, and he must have been standing right there at the side of Ned Hutchinson saying, now make that call, because he was right on Hutchinson's heels in calling me to congratulate me. And I attribute my elevation to the Superior Court primarily to George Deukmejian and my close affinity to the Armenian community in Montebello. Just the way things happened to work out. Governor Deukmejian and I have remained very, very close friends for all of these many, many years, and I have a great deal of respect for him, as I did for Pat Brown, who first put me on the municipal court and started my judicial career, and it was George Deukmejian that ended it. You know, life is funny. You can't anticipate what's going to happen in the years ahead. I had no idea that George Deukmejian, who was then a senator, state senator representing the Long Beach area, would in time become Attorney General and governor himself. And one day I received a call from Governor Deukmejian's appointment secretary, Marvin Baxter, and he indicated that the governor would like for you to apply for an elevation to the Court of Appeal with no promises. He has no idea, of course, the Commission on Judicial Performance will have to evaluate you, and they'll do a thorough evaluation to advise the governor as to whether or not you're Court of Appeal material, but he would like for you to apply. And I said I would. I was elevated to the Court of Appeal as a result of that. The elevation to the Court of Appeal was about 1982, but by that time I had been on the court about 22, 23 years. I was thinking of retiring and getting a little closer to home, maybe by that time affiliating with a large law firm and continuing in the last chapter of my life, maybe in an of-counsel status with a law firm, but being a little closer to home. And then in the fall of 1986, something very dramatic happened. 3 of the 7 justices of the California Supreme Court came up for their confirmation election. And all 3 were defeated. First time that's ever happened in the history of California. And there were then 3 vacancies on the Supreme Court. Governor Deukmejian, knowing that the court was dead in the water now, when you lose 3 out of your 7 justices, everything pretty much stops. He selected 3 veteran trial judges and appellate court justices to fill those 3 spots. I was one. The other from also Long Beach was Dave Eagleson, who had been the presiding judge of the LA Superior Court of Veteran Trial Judge, a great administrator and good friend. And then Marcus Kaufman from San Bernardino, who had been on the trial court for many years and then on the appellate court and was considered a wonderful scholar. Anyhow, all 3 of us at that time, with the exception of Dave Eagleson, were close to retirement. And we took our positions. We did our best to bring the court up to speed at that time. I was on the court for 2.5, maybe 3 years. I announced my retirement. I did stay on the court a little longer than I had originally intended to. But you cannot say no to the governor when he wants to appoint you to the California Supreme Court. And I was up in San Francisco, I did my job, and I did my job well, I think. But eventually I did, when things got smoothed over a little bit, I retired.